In this video, I'm going to show you my setup for SAML authentication in a SvelteKit app. For this app, I'm using Tailwind for the styling, and I have PG installed as I'm saving the user to a PostgreSQL database. You can, of course, use any database you want. In order to get the SAML working, I used this node-saml npm package and installed it using this command. To start off, I already have a simple login page from one of my previous videos, and we have a button that will initiate the SAML flow when you click on it. If you don't know how SAML works, it'll help to understand the flow a bit first. Your app or site would be what's called a service provider, or SP, and the company who holds your login credentials would be the identity provider, or IDP. In this example, our site will initiate the login to the IDP, which will be Microsoft Azure or Entra, but any SAML 2.0 identity provider will work the same. To log in, you send the user to the IDP's login URL and provide a SAML request and relay state query parameter. The SAML request value is an encrypted string that contains info about your app, and the relay state is where you want the user to be sent after. The user logs into the IDP and is sent back to a URL you specify, usually called the reply URL or assertion consumer service URL. That endpoint's code needs to read a response in the body of a post request and extract the user's info from it. Then they are sent to the relay state URL after you save their session somehow. So let's see how this all works. Again, on our login page, we have a button for SSO login. SAML is typically used for single sign-on, which is why I labeled it that. The login page is a button that submits a form, and that form submission goes to a login action in SvelteKit. And the login action is read on the matching pluspage.server.ts file here. In here, we set up the config the SAML module wants, which is the callback URL, which is where the login response will be sent. For me, I called mine /saml/ACS. This needs to be given to the IDP and needs to match. And here it is on the Microsoft Azure side. Then it wants the entry point, which is the IDP's login URL. For me, that was provided by Azure in the admin screen. Then we need the string for the certificate, which also comes from the IDP. In my env file, it's the raw characters from the certificate file that Azure gave me, minus the begin and end certificate lines, but I believe it also supports including those lines. Here in Azure is where I downloaded that file, then I just viewed it in Notepad and put it in my env file. Then we just need a unique identifier for the app. This needs to match what you provided to the IDP in the identifier or entity ID field. With all that, then we initialize a new SAML object from the node-saml module. And to generate the encrypted SAML request string we need for the URL, we would call this getAuthorizeMessageAsync function. And in this function is where we provide the relay state URL, which is where they go after logging in. We then take the response from that and turn it into a query parameter and stick it after the entry port URL, and it'll end up looking like this. Then we just redirect the user to that URL using SvelteKit. Now if we try this button, when we click on it, I get taken to the Microsoft sign-in, where I can sign in with my Microsoft account. But after we log in, we technically get sent to the SAML ACS route, but that route immediately takes us to the home page, so we don't really see that page. But let's check out the code at least. This endpoint is just a +server.ts file that looks for post requests. In here, we grab the post's body text, which is just a long string coming from Microsoft that looks like this. And we can turn it into an object with this line of code. And this will end up having a SAML response property and the relay state. We then set up our SAML config again, but this time I have turned off signing the response. Microsoft Azure only signs the initial request in the assertion, at least for my setting, and not the response. So I need to not sign it with a certificate or it'll throw an error. We then again create a SAML object, and we now need to await and run the validate post response async function, sending the params above to it. This will return back an object with various info, but the main thing we want from it is the profile property, and in there a list of attributes about the user. Here's a list of attributes we send back by default from Azure. They can of course be changed or added if desired. Then for my example, I'm saving the entire attribute object into a PostgreSQL database so we can pull it up later. This database returns a GUI ID, which we can set in our cookie below. I have a helper function that I use for running this database query, and if you're interested in how it works, I do have a separate video on that as well. Oh, and if you're unsure what attributes are coming back or what their property name is called from the SAML provider, you can always console log it here or check what it got saved to your database. After we save the cookie, we can just use SvelteKit to redirect them to the relay state URL. Now, in order to get this to work in SvelteKit, I had to do a few tricks. By default, other sites can't send post requests to your app for security reasons, so I had to turn that off in the svelte.config file. But before you get upset, I re-implemented the exact same check that SvelteKit did in the hooks file, but I excluded the check if it's in this array, and this array just includes our ACS endpoint for now. I found this workaround on the official SvelteKit issue trackers in GitHub. And while we're here though, let's go over how to check for a valid session and get the SAML user throughout our site. Below, still in the hooks file, we can grab our cookie. If there is one, we can grab the user from the session table and set it to our locals. And if you're not aware, the locals is a variable that is available on every server request. So we'll have access to the user anytime we want. Below that, we do a check to see if the user's info is missing. And if they aren't on the login or ACS page, we sent them to the login. This forces someone to be logged in on your app. And below at the bottom are some other helper functions provided from that same GitHub issue. Now back on our site, we're logged in and on the home page, and I have the nav bar showing the user's name. And in the body of the page, I'm dumping the full attribute list we got from the IDP as well. To do that, I grabbed the locals on the root page.server.ts file and just sent it back the SAML attributes as a user object. And to retrieve it on the page itself, we get the data by importing data from the props rune. And now in the header and body or wherever, we can just access that information as you see fit. And finally, just like in my other login videos, we have a logout link that just sends you to a logout route. In that route, there's a file that just expires your session in the database, removes the cookie, and sends you back to the login page. And that's about it. It's not too hard to set up. There is some setup that needs to happen on the IDP side as well, of course, if it's not already. But with SAML, it's kind of a standard, so most places provide it and ask for the same settings that you've seen here. If you have any questions about this though, just let me know, and thanks for watching.